I want to put something in perspective for you. Just Delta and United Airlines have received more than $5 billion already from U.S. taxpayers to help pay the salaries of their combined, it's about 200,000 employees. New York City has 8 million residents. It's received about $1 billion in financial aid from the federal government, but it faces a $7 billion tax revenue shortfall going forward and no end in sight, or at least assistance for cities like New York or the rest of the country, for that matter, from the federal government. Scott Stringer is the New York City Comptroller. He's joining us now to address that issue and what cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and states need in the form of fiscal response from the U.S. government. Scott, good to have you here.
Great to be on.
So when I use those analogies, I mean, we've got 8 million people here, and it's almost like 1974, Ford to the city, drop dead, right?
Well, look, Donald Trump has been telling New York City to drop dead even when he lived here. So we as New Yorkers are not surprised at that. But what is really shocking is that New York City is the epicenter of the virus in the United States. So it would stand to reason that any stimulus package must reflect the urgency of the crisis in New York. But here's what's incredible to me. South Dakota, which has 40 cases, gets $2.5 billion earmarked. New York City with 35,000 cases gets $5 billion. So basically, we are giving South Dakota $1 million a person. In New York City, it's $155,000. This is no way to eradicate a virus, and it's definitely no way to shortchange a city that, by all accounts, is the financial epicenter not just of America, but of the entire world. And this stimulus, I think, has to be more robust in focusing not just on New York City, but all urban areas that play such a critical role in the national and international economy.
So, Scott, barring that aid from the federal government, right now the city is looking at a cut of about $2 billion worth to various kinds of municipal services. Pools are closed, for example, although they might be closed anyway because of the pandemic. Is that going to be enough? So let's say that we don't get this aid from the federal government in New York City. What is the city going to do to cover its budget?
Getting no aid is not an option. The question is, how much will we get? Look, this is very dire. We now have a city with $6 to $7 billion loss in tax revenue, and that's just looking at the short term. It could be as high as $10 billion by the next fiscal year. So there's an urgency to this. Look, I'm the first to tell you that Bill de Blasio did not put away enough money for the rainy day that was sure to come. That's on him. But you can't punish the rest of the city and the rest of the state. We now have to take matters into our own hands, which means we need to lobby Congress for a robust stimulus package for states and localities. I do think the city will come out of this budget because we have at least some money set aside. So that gets us through June, assuming that the mayor and the council acts responsibly. But then we have a whole new situation. We don't know how we're going to jumpstart the economy. There's a lot of papers and theories, but we haven't really seen this. And New York has experience dealing with this. You know, in the 1970s, we had the fiscal crisis. We had 9/11. We had the 2008 economic collapse. New York City has always done our part and fought through it. But this time we need a coordinated effort with Washington, working with Governor Cuomo and working with New York City.
Scott, you mentioned some states that have benefited more than New York, South Dakota, one that you singled out. There is an argument to be made about whether politics is at play here, but two questions for you. Number one, how have those conversations with the federal government progressed for the city? And number two, how much aid are you asking for?
Well, look, it remains to be seen what the stimulus packages or more than one will bring to the city. I can only tell you that we need billions of dollars in relief. Look, we have people who can't pay rent. We have people who have small businesses that may never open if there's no intervention. We need to have a strategic regional financial plan. That's what Governor Cuomo and the other governors are working on. But I can tell you right here that the people who are being hit the hardest are the people who always get hit hard when economic times get more complicated. So we have a lot of people of color, Black and brown, Asian Americans, who have small businesses that without any direct help to our more diverse communities we are going to be in a very serious economic crisis in the city for years to come. That's why we need a holistic approach. We have to understand that when we get the stimulus money, we get enough of it, and it's earmarked to opening up the economy, not just on Wall Street. I don't mean to say that on this show, but we also have to think about what our Main Street strategy and look at communities like Corona and Bed-Stuy and the South Bronx and all the communities that we don't usually hear about on financial shows, but this will be the challenge for local elected officials in New York City. And my sense is that's probably happening in major cities like LA and Chicago as well.
Scott, I think you raised a really, really important part. It's a dire situation, and it's highlighting disparities. And you were just referencing some of them. If we don't see the right kind of funding or action, what do you think that means for wealth inequality going forward?
Look, we know in New York City that the city spends $20 billion on procurement. We hire law firms, accounting firms. We actually hire small businesses. And believe it or not, in a city as diverse as ours, the spend for women and minority-owned businesses is only 4.9% of this funding. It is disgraceful. And now it's going to be even more difficult to aid these businesses because they've been fundamentally discriminated against long before the virus. And what the virus is showing is how the city has failed to plan economically for the entire borough, for the entire boroughs throughout all of our diversity. So while we talk a good game on diversity, well, look what's happening here. The amount of people in the Bronx who are suffering with the virus because of poor medical conditions, the people economically who are suffering in Queens and Brooklyn. So look, this is an opportunity to right a systemic wrong, but it also is going to take bold leadership and action. We need federal help, but we also have to reimagine what New York City budgets look like, maybe a little less politics and a little more focus on the challenges at hand.
Scott, it's Adam Shapiro again. I am curious. Two questions for you. If you've heard anything about the negotiations with Governor Cuomo and President Trump yesterday, and then if you were to run for mayor of the largest city in the United States, what needs to happen on day one as far as tax policy in this city to help get people back to work and to soften the blow of what's going on?
Well, I don't have any inside knowledge of the president's discussion. We're not exactly on speaking terms. But I can tell you that day one of the new government administration in 2022 is a little late as far as I'm concerned. I actually believe that the leadership that's in place now has to come together and work on finding financial solutions so that by January 2022, as an entire new government in New York City takes over, we are beyond some of these crisis issues. And we are now thinking about how we continue to make the New York City economy fair, more robust, and continue to be the epicenter of world finance, because that's exactly what we are. It's what we've always been. And quite frankly, I don't think the world can do without New York City. So I'm always amazed at the haters out there who think that their small town would benefit in some way by New York's demise. That's not what the numbers show.
I think all of us New Yorkers would agree with you on that front, Scott. Finally, it's Julie again, I wanted to touch on a personal issue, because as you are confronting all of these budgetary issues for the city on a personal level, you're in mourning for your mother who sadly passed as a result of coronavirus. Now, you said in an interview with Anderson Cooper in the wake of that President Trump had blood on his hands because of her death and the deaths of others. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? And can you tell us what needs to be done now, do you think, most urgently to stop this pandemic?
Look, I don't think there's a person with any sensibilities that doesn't think that Donald Trump and his administration bungled this incredible crisis, maybe the crisis of our lifetime. And yes, when you bungle a health crisis like this, you're going to have to live with the consequences of thousands and thousands of people who lost their lives, some needlessly, and families from around the United States who are now looking and saying, how did our federal government, the greatest country in the world, fail us? I'm one of those family members. But look, if my mother were here today, she served in the New York City Council and as a woman who ran for office when it was tough to do back in the 1970s. And what she would say, and I think people of her generation would say, is attack this, take it to the limit, fundamentally change the way we budget, how we look at virus protection. Look, New York City needs to overhaul its emergency operations. There's no doubt in my mind that we were lacking in our response, but there's a lack of federal response. So look, Julie, I'm in mourning. There's no closure. You can't have a funeral. You can't, in my case, have a shiver. It's not the way I thought it would go, but there's a lot of people out there, parents and grandparents, who didn't get to say goodbye to their grandchildren. And this makes me feel a special urgency so that we don't lose any of our those amazing parents that raised all of us, some of us in very tough conditions.
Scott Stringer is New York City's comptroller, on the front line financially for the city, but also on the front line of COVID-19 personally. Thank you.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.